Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about MEV burn, which is a piece of research that I'm very excited about because it's a potential upgrade to Ethereum, which I think of as being the equivalent of EIP 1559, but for MEV. Okay, so there's this mental model that I want you to keep in your mind, which is that there's two use cases for block space. On the one hand, you can use block space as a means of including your transactions, of getting confirmation of your transactions. But then another use case of the blockchain is specifically to get an ordering. So for example, you might want to be at the very top of the block. And when you're competing for inclusion, you get congestion, just like traffic on the road where lots of cars are competing to be on the road. But then when you're competing to be at the very top of the block, when you're competing for ordering, you have contention because the various people are contending to be in that first place. And the block value really is the sum of these two, like the congestion value and the contention value. And so we're all familiar with the EIP 1559 transaction base fee kind of going up and down with time. And we're also familiar with MEV, which also kind of spikes a little bit more randomly with time. And so the contention fee, I guess, is another word for MEV. And really what we've done with EIP 1559 is we found a way to burn the congestion fee. And MEV burn is nothing more than the other side of the coin, where now we can burn the contention fee. And there's two kind of classes of benefits for MEV burn. On the one hand, we have benefits from smoothing, and we have benefits from redistribution. Now, smoothing, I mean specifically reward smoothing. So as a validator right now, the MEV spikes kind of bring a lot of volatility, a lot of variance. And when you burn the MEV, you kind of bring this clean issuance-based rewards. And reward smoothing comes with security benefits, as we'll see. And then there's this cash flow redistribution aspect of MEV burn, where basically right now the recipients of MEV burn as a group are the stakers, and we're kind of redirecting this cash flow towards the holders. And there's some economic benefits that come with that, as we'll talk about. But before talking about the benefits, let me try and talk about the construction itself, just to give you a little bit of intuition as to how it works. So the context for MEV burn is proposer-builder separation. So let me try and recap that real quick. So you have builders that are doing the heavy lifting of building blocks, and they submit bids in a bid pool. Right now, the bid pool is maintained by so-called relays that are kind of these semi-trusted operators that kind of tells the proposers when you have a valid bid. The proposer, generally speaking, will pick the highest paying bid, so the top bid, from the bid pool, and they will commit to it by signing it with their secret key, and they're going to broadcast this signed bid. And as soon as they've done that, they've basically guaranteed some sort of payment to themselves of the bid value, basically from the builder to the proposer. And then once there's been a commitment to the bid, the builders are now invited to reveal the payloads corresponding to the bid. So that's proposer-builder separation. And there's a very specific thing called enshrined proposer-builder separation, where we put this logic at layer 1 within consensus. And the way it works is as follows. So you have this one slot, and before the slot even starts, you have this bidding period where the builders send their bids to a bid pool. And at the very beginning of the slot, the proposer is meant to commit to the bid, as we've discussed, and then there's the reveal phase by the builder, kind of somewhere later in the slot. So this is all was all covered in the previous slide. And the thing I wanted to show you here is that we have attesters, kind of at layer 1, whose role is to enforce that proposer-builder separation is working smoothly, and really what they're doing is that they're attesting to timeliness. So they're making sure that the signed bid was broadcast on time, and same for the payload, that the payload was revealed on time. You actually don't need to know these details, but it's mostly if you're curious. Now, how do you get from here to MEV burn? It's actually very, very simple. And this is what I wanted to illustrate, is that MEV burn is, like, technically speaking, a very small diff on top of Enshrined PBS. And this is it. So basically, what we're going to do is we're going to ask the attesters to observe the bid pool, specifically the bid pool 2 seconds before the start of the slot. And we want them to calculate the so-called burn floor, which is going to be the top bid, the maximum bid that was observed 2 seconds before the start of the slot. And we also want them to enforce this burn floor at the proposal level. So basically, we're saying that if the proposer picked a bid which didn't respect this burn floor, so it was not a bid which kind of maximized the value, then that bid is just not going to get included on chain. Okay, and this is the formula for the burn floor. Basically, we want to take the maximum of all the bids that came 2 seconds early, meaning that they were 2 seconds before the start of the slot. And we want to maximize the sum of the transaction base fees, so that's EIP 1559, and this new thing, which we call MEV, but in this context, we're calling the block base fee. So there's 2 base fees, 1 per transaction and also 1 per block. And we want to maximize the value of the block, and we kind of want to maximize the burn, as it were. And the bid value, instead of going to the proposer, it just gets destroyed, just like EIP 1559. Okay, so what are the benefits of this? And they kind of fall into 3 categories. So first, we're kind of enshrining infrastructure, and so we're kind of pushing the market in a certain direction which we feel is specifically healthy in terms of decentralization, in terms of censorship, and things like that. So I'll talk about that. We also have benefits from smoothing that are security benefits, as I mentioned, and we have benefits from redistribution, which are economic. And so I'll go through these 3 types of benefits one by one, starting with enshrining. So one of the first nice things that we get from MEV burn is we get an MEV oracle. What does it mean? It means that the Ethereum blockchain now becomes aware of how much MEV there is on its own chain. And this is very similar to the congestion base fee, where now we have this oracle that can be used in smart contracts, for example, if you want to do block space futures or anything like that. And I guess the other advantage of having a base fee is that we're kind of enshrining ETH, right? So if you want to pay for the congestion fee, you have to use ETH. And then you will get the same benefit with MEV burn. So with MEV burn, we have this new base fee at the block level that has to be paid in ETH. So ETH is kind of a privileged unit of account in the context of Ethereum. And we get this very nice oracle that gives Ethereum some level of introspection. Okay, another advantage of MEV burn is that it forces the market towards a more trustless equilibrium. And the reason is that Enshrined PBS gives us this new bid pool, but it's kind of optional to use. The builders and the validators can still, if they want, go through the relays, and there's actually reasons to use the relays whenever the bid value is greater than the collateral posted by the builder, because now the proposer wants to have a guaranteed payment from the builder, but the collateral is not sufficient, and so you need to use the trusted relays. Anyway, long story short is MEV burn kind of removes the option for the proposer to go through the trusted relays, and it kind of forces the market through this more enshrined, more decentralized equilibrium. Another nice advantage of MEV burn is around censorship. So right now we have basically we have the bid pool is split into 2 sections. On the one hand, we have bids from censoring builders, for example, builders that censor OFAC transactions. And then we have bids from builders that don't censor. And so some of the proposers might only listen to the censored bid pool, but not to the uncensored one. They're kind of pretending as if this uncensored bid pool didn't exist. And here are some of the operators doing that, for example, Celsius and Jump Capital. But with MEV burn, we're kind of forcing these operators that want to censor to listen to both mempools. And if it so happens that the top bid is in the uncensored bid pool, then they have to include it. And so we're kind of forcing the hand against censorship. Another kind of secondary censorship benefit is around the cost of censorship. So before EIP 1559, if you didn't include a specific transaction which you wanted to censor, then you kind of need to pay the full transaction fee for that transaction. But with EIP 1559, you only have to forego the tip. And generally speaking, the tip is at least an order of magnitude smaller. It might be one gwei per gas relative to the base fee, which might be, 30 gwei per gas. So it's 30 times smaller, and so it's 30 times cheaper to censor specific transactions on Ethereum. But with MEV burn, with this burn maximization kind of idea, we go back to the full cost of censorship being the full transaction fee. Okay, now let's talk about benefits from smoothing. And this is what got me interested in the first place in MEV burn, because there's some various attacks where MEV can affect the stability of the layer 1 itself, and MEV burn addresses those. So one of the things to be cognizant of is that the median MEV return is significantly smaller than the average MEV return. So the average is about 3 times larger. And there's some really extreme blocks out there. So for example, there was this one block which had 691 ETH of rewards in a single slot, which is about 12,000 times the median. So you have this distribution which kind of skews very much on these very, very large MEV rewards. And this is the exact same situation as Bitcoin proof of work. Right? With Bitcoin proof of work, if you buy a mining rig and you run it for 5 years, more likely than not, you're never going to produce a block. And so what you need to do to remain competitive, especially as a small consensus participant, is you need to pool. And so pooling is basically a way to start with this lottery and then kind of smooth it out and have fairness where every validator can get the average as opposed to small validators only getting the median. But burning gives us another option, which doesn't have the centralization pressures that pooling has. So that's nice. MEV burn removes centralization pressures. Another aspect is basically proposers are incentivized to fight each other for the MEV. So imagine that you have 3 proposers in a row, and they each should be having their share of MEV. But then the very last proposer decides to be evil and to DDoS the previous 2 proposers. So what's going to happen is that proposer n-2 and n-1 is not going to receive their share of MEV. And instead what's going to happen is that the MEV is going to go to the malicious proposer. And so ta-da, just by DOSing a few IP addresses, you've tripled your MEV. And MEV burn addresses that because MEV doesn't flow to the proposers. It flows to the ETH holders. And so you remove these incentives to basically destabilize the layer 1 chain. And DOSing is only one such example of an attack. There's kind of a whole set of attacks you can do to steal MEV from other participants. Another problem with MEV today is what I call rug pooling. Is basically when operators of a staking pool are going to rug the stakers, meaning those who provide the ETH stake. And if you think of Rocket Pool or if you think of Lido, there's operators that are collateralized. So for example, with Lido, you have reputation as your collateral. In the case of Rocket Pool, you have ETH and RPL tokens as collateral. And most of the time, the MEV that you get in any given slot is going to be less than the collateral of the operator. So everything's incentive aligned there. But some of the time, what's going to happen is that there's going to be a huge MEV spike, which is going to be greater than the collateral of the operator. And here, the operator is incentivized to just run away, take the MEV reward for themselves, and forego the collateral. And what we're seeing is that these decentralized pools are basically competing to lower and lower and lower the amount of collateral so you have more collateral efficiency, but this opens up this attack more and more and more. And so MEV burn is a way to basically make decentralized staking pools much more stable and robust. Another aspect of smoothing is toxic MEV. Let's say there's a user who's a victim of a sandwich attack, or maybe the victim of some sort of hack. And then that leads to MEV going away from the user to the staker. Toxic MEV is defined as MEV where there is a clear victim that's losing value. And so here what we have is this kind of conundrum, this dilemma: should we return the MEV? And there's kind of an ethical, a moral dilemma, but there's maybe a legal dilemma going on. And one of the bad things here is that if you're really good-hearted and you want to return the MEV, then suddenly you become uncompetitive. Because some operators, for example, the Lido operators, kind of as a policy, will say, well, we won't return the MEV. And so you would have an APR, which is an expectation lower if you're good-hearted than those who don't return. And so MEV burn just removes this whole question. But then there's a kind of another similar scenario, which is what I call systemic MEV, where you have huge amounts of toxic MEV, not a few ETH, but a few millions of ETH. So imagine that one of the rollups gets hacked. It has 10 million users and 10 million ETH gets hacked. Now a single validator just received 10 million ETH out of nowhere. It's almost like the DAO hacker just stole a huge amount of ETH, and that could be systemically dangerous for the blockchain because, okay, we need to ask ourselves, okay, do we want to bail out this rollup? Do we want to, or maybe the staker might decide to use this ETH to perform some sort of attack or just be misaligned with the community, and we don't want to have one single actor having 10% of the ETH supply. That would not be palatable. Another aspect of smoothing is that it unlocks so-called stake capping. So it's healthy to have a relatively small number of a small amount of stake. We don't want to be in a position where there's 80% of ETH staked. Maybe 25% is more than enough. And if we do want to have the stake capping, what we can do is have an issuance curve which goes down as soon as you get close to your target. So for example, let's say we want to cap the total amount of ETH to 30 million ETH, staked ETH to 30 million. As soon as we get close to the 30 million, the issuance curve starts going negative. And so the closer you are to 30 million, the more and more negative you get. But in order to do that safely, we need MEV burn because otherwise you're kind of really accelerating the pooling effect. Like the variance, when you remove the issuance and you only have MEV, then the variance is even larger. Now, stake capping gives us validator capping, which means that we have a limited number of validators. We like this, and the reason we like this is because it means we can have smaller validators. So right now, we need 32 ETH as a minimum to start the validators, but maybe in the future, we might only need 8 ETH. And capping the worst case number of validators is a way to help us get smaller validators, but we can do other things as well. We can have shorter slots if we have fewer validators, and we might also be able to unlock big upgrades like single slot finality when we have fewer validators. And then kind of another interesting aspect of stake capping is that we're burning restaking proceeds. So very soon, with projects like EigenLayer, we're going to have 3 components to staking. We're going to have the issuance as a reward, we're going to have the MEV as a reward, and then there's going to be this third bucket of yield from restaking. And stake capping is basically a way to do restaking burn, meaning to burn the yield from restaking. So that's a potential future upgrade as well. That's unlocked by MEV burn. Okay, final section in terms of benefits of MEV burn is the redistributive aspect of instead of giving the MEV to the stakers, we give them to the ETH holders. Now today, this is the amount of staked ETH that we have, and it can be classified in 2 buckets. On the one hand, we have staked ETH that's there from the issuance rewards, and then we have some sort of additional staked ETH that is there just because there's just more rewards to be had. And so if we were to do MEV burn, we'd only get the staked ETH from issuance. Now, the good news is that we've designed Ethereum in such a way that even if there's 0 MEV, the staked ETH from issuance should be sufficient to secure Ethereum. And so arguably, anything on top of that, anything above any basically non-zero amount of MEV is wasteful, because we're wastefully paying for security, which we don't need, because we have security even if there's 0 MEV. Now, why is this a good thing? So one of the reasons is that we have ETH, which is this really unique asset on Ethereum. It's the only pristine collateral asset. It's this collateral money. And there's 2 big use cases of collateral money. On the one hand, you can stick it into staking, and we call that economic security because you're securing Ethereum. Or you can stick it into DeFi, and we call that economic bandwidth because it unlocks applications like stablecoins that requires a lot of collateral. And with MEV, we're potentially going to be in a really lopsided situation where the beacon chain is going to absorb like a sponge all the liquidity, and there's going to be very little economic bandwidth left. And so MEV burn is kind of a way to have more predictable and more balance between ETH that's deployed for economic security and ETH that's deployed for economic bandwidth. Another aspect is reduced issuance. So the total amount of issuance is roughly speaking, well, it's exactly, I guess, the square root of the total amount of ETH staked. And so if there's less ETH staked with MEV burn, then there's going to be less issuance. And so the cost of proof of stake is going to go down. We're saving this little orange area. And so this brings me to the economic efficiency that goes up. On the one hand, MEV burn reduces the amount of issuance, removes wasteful spending for security, which we don't need, and there's this burn aspect, which further increases the economic efficiency. Now, I tried to put some numbers, concrete numbers, on what this were, and I tried to be roughly conservative, and what I got was about $250,000 per year, $250,000 ETH per year. And so MEV burn, very roughly speaking, is a $500,000 ETH per year optimization. And what that means is that the ETH supply would decrease by an additional $500,000 per year versus what it's currently doing. And so that's very ultrasound for Ethereum. And that gives us more economic bandwidth and more economic security from a US dollar denominated standpoint because we have more scarcity of ETH for the asset. And then this is my last slide around tax efficiency, which is maybe like a really weird slide to put here, but I just want to end with this analogy with companies. Let's say as a company you have profits and you want to distribute those profits to shareholders. Well, you have 2 options. Option number 1 is that you pay dividends to your shareholders. Or option number 2 is you use share buybacks, like Apple does. They reduce the total supply of Apple shares, and then that kind of inflates the price of each Apple share. And the clever thing is that the buybacks are taxed as capital gains, whereas the dividends are taxed as income tax. And so for me, in most jurisdictions, as I understand, income tax is significantly higher than capital gains. So in the UK, income tax is 50%, capital gains is 20%. And so we're paying 2.5 times more taxes than we should be paying. And so MEV burn is kind of a way to reduce the sell pressure on ETH from paying tax bills to nation states around the world. And that's pretty much it. That's all the advantages of MEV burn. Thank you. I have 30 seconds, so maybe just one question.
Thank you. Very interesting. I wanted to ask about the 2 seconds. Was that just an arbitrary length? And also, do you think this will affect the effectiveness of LMD score boosting and would just incentivize validators to wait longer into a slot and wait for more bids to pile up?
So the 2 second was chosen as a conservative synchrony assumption. Basically, we want the property that all the bids that are sent from the builders will reach the proposers and the attesters within 2 seconds. So they basically get gossiped out within 2 seconds, so that the proposer at the very start of the slot has received whatever bid there was 2 seconds ago, and so they have the option of being compliant with the burn floor. In terms of might this change the game dynamics where builders might be incentivized to post their bids after the 2 seconds, it turns out that from the perspective of the builders, the incentives don't change at all. Builders make the exact same profit. The only thing that changes is the profit is like the MEV going to the ETH holders as opposed to going to the proposers. So proposers don't really have an incentive to change their game. And the nice thing about MEV burn is that if there's even a single builder who is willing to play this game of submitting bids in real time before the 2 second threshold, the whole thing works. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Happy to talk about it more offline. Thank you.